During Pride Month, you may have heard the phrase, "we've always been here," and that's because one of the common false claims about LGBT plus people by prejudiced people are that they're somehow a modern trend rather than a real demographic. After all, when you look at pop culture, it just seems like sometime after the hippies came along, they just suddenly appeared, and then by the 2000s, they were everywhere. In truth, though, this perception is the result of Western culture slowly opening up to LGBT plus tolerance after decades of treating the topic as pop culture taboo and centuries more of treating the topic as a societal evil. While terms and understandings have changed over time, there have always been examples of LGBT plus people existing and living out their lives. This video is going to discuss the lives of Sylvia Drake and Charity Bryant, two 19th century women who ended up together in effectively a married relationship in the small Vermont town of Weybridge. What makes this couple interesting is they were able to effectively live out their normal lives together without deriving hostility from the town, but they still did receive a lot of fascination, resulting in a decent amount of documentation for just a normal couple. While I will provide several sources in the description, there was an excellent 2014 book by Rachel Hope Cleves titled Charity and Sylvia, A Same-Sex Marriage in Early America that is my primary source of information. My primary secondary source, which also includes primary sources. You get what I mean. Charity Bryant was born on May 22, 1777 during the middle of the American Revolution in North Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Her mother, Silence Bryant, unfortunately died shortly after her birth from tuberculosis, and like many families at this time, Charity had many siblings, of which several also died pretty young. Charity wasn't that close to her father, and even after he remarried, she still felt distant enough from her family to grow melancholic, often viewing her mother's death as a sign that she was almost in a way cursed. But Charity did end up discovering a love of poetry, which she used as an outlet for her melancholic feelings. As the sun rising pleasant in May seems to promise new life to the lawn, even such was my youth's early day, and as fair and serene was its dawn. But clouds have o'ershadowed the scene, and tempests continue to blow, while to think on the days that have been but serves to embitter my woe, and say, was I wrong for to dream that fortune upon me would shine, when friends to me smiling did seem, and the tenderest of mothers was mine, but heaven too soon of its boon, repenting, nounced it again, while I am left poor and alone, by remembrance to double my pain. Like many children born out of mothers with tuberculosis, Charity did have a sickly early childhood, but despite this and her father's more distant approach, she survived, and ended up redeveloping her loyalty to her family thanks to some loving siblings. In 1797, Charity became a teacher in the nearby town of Dartmouth, finally living on her own. It was during this time she was able to explore her developing feelings towards women without having to worry about her family's prying eyes. It was fairly normal at this time for boarding schools to be staffed solely by female teachers, and sometimes would even bunk together. Add to the fact that schoolhouse teachers were one of the few occupations for unmarried women to make an income at the time, and soon there was a stereotype of schoolhouses being lesbian havens. Whether this attracted Charity to the job in particular or not is uncertain, because Charity didn't seem to enjoy teaching itself very much, but we do know that she had multiple intimate relationships with local women, with plenty of erotic letters to confirm their existence. One woman simply known as Eliza wrote that Charity had the power to awaken all her feelings, and the thoughts of receiving another letter from her gave her an agitated bosom. Charity in fact had so many relationships, she found it hard to settle with a single partner, causing jealousy disputes. Keep in mind, she's only 20. One important thing to understand is that at this time period in New England, women were able to be a lot friendlier with each other socially in public than men. So while the erotic stuff had to be done in secret, basic expressions of closeness or spending lots of time together wasn't viewed with a lot of scrutiny, which made it easier to both blend in and have plausible deniability. There was also a societal understanding at the time that a benefit of close friendships between women like this could even help find matching pairs for future courtships with someone else's son. One day in 1807, Charity went to visit a friend in a small town of Weybridge, Vermont named Polly. She then met Polly's sister, Sylvia Drake. Sylvia Drake was born on Halloween of 1784 in Easton, Massachusetts during America's first year of official independence. In 1788, Sylvia's family faced bankruptcy, forcing them to eventually relocate to different towns for better job opportunities. Eventually, by 1799, Sylvia and her mother moved to Weybridge, Vermont, where her older brother Asaph was able to settle. Sylvia had desires for a better education, and despite her family's support for a better education, they were either unable to find a school to teach her more advanced material, or when she did find an academy, she couldn't afford to sign up. So in Weybridge she remained, feeling a bit depressed. Sylvia did have several attempted male suitors, but she turned them all down, showing very little interest. Sylvia seemed to only have close female friendships. Sylvia's older sister Polly grew suspicious and was worried that Sylvia would be fooled and ensnared into thinking that she could get the same thing out of such friendships as with a proper marriage. Polly was partially inspired to write to Sylvia about this matter because of the story she'd heard about her friend Charity Bryant. However, Polly tried to use the metaphor of comparing it to guys who ensnare women with romance and intimacy in bed but then grow cold feet at the altar. Which, I'm not sure how that was supposed to convince her, but whatever. She then, of course, tried the classic routine of evoking the story of Sodom and Gomorrah from the Bible, but eventually Sylvia was able to convince Polly that, golly gee, she just wasn't the marrying type. And Polly eventually became okay with this, thinking that at least their mother had one kid to take care of her in old age. But eventually, in 1807, right before Sylvia turned 23, she finally got to meet Polly's best friend, Charity Bryant. Charity Bryant fell in love with Sylvia Drake very quickly and decided to stay in Weybridge. For one thing, her previous relationship dramas back home were already starting to give her a reputation. But Weybridge had a business opportunity for Charity due to being a small town with fewer than 1,000 people that had far more men than women. As a result, there was demand for traditionally feminine jobs. Charity offered to run a tailoring business with her new beloved Sylvia Drake, and the two moved into a home together in 1809 to run it. The people of the town very much enjoyed their business, and despite the relationship becoming much more obvious over time, they didn't seem to mind. Charity naturally wrote dozens of love poems to her beloved partner, often in acrostic style, meaning the beginning letters of each line would spell out Sylvia's name. Here's a preserved paper with one of them as an example. But okay, why didn't the town mind? There's many complicated factors going on here. For one thing, while being gay was considered a sin, that didn't mean the active levels of hostility and homophobia were always the same. These things happened in waves, the same way religious fervor from evangelicalism did. Secondly, marriage was still very much an institution of convenience and societal norms rather than just love. Charity and Sylvia's relationship was easier to accept as comparable to a marriage because they followed the rules of a marriage. Charity considered herself the husband as she made herself head of household when filing taxes and performed the typical chores and duties normally assigned to a husband. Sylvia, meanwhile, was viewed as the wife, doing the stereotypical wife chores and duties. Since their more erotic forms of intimacy were kept private, they provided an important service to the town, and they were just following customs, it was a lot harder for the average resident to see any sort of harm in it. The two women even attended church together at the local Weybridge Congregational Church every week. Apparently, one of Sylvia's favorite Bible verses was Romans 10:17. Then finally, there is the unfortunate reality that during this time, male gay relationships were viewed with much more hostility than lesbian ones. In late 19th century England, lesbianism was legal on a technicality because their laws only explicitly banned male homosexuality. Plus, the idea of an unmarried woman having some sort of business to support her wasn't completely unheard of. Widows do exist. So it was just an overall less shocking image to see two unmarried women simply living and working together. While their relationship certainly drew discussion, the two women were able to remain together for basically the rest of their lives. At first, Sylvia's family was unsupportive of their relationship and refused to even visit, but over time would warm to it and end their avoidance. After 31 years together, Sylvia wrote the following in her diary. 31 years since I left my mother's house and commenced serving in company with dear Miss B. Sin Mars, all earthly bliss, and no common sinner have I been, but God has spared my life, given me everything I would enjoy, and now I have space, if I improve it, to exercise true penitence. In July of 1843, Charity Bryant's nephew, named William, briefly stayed for a visit and later on eventually wrote the following. If I were permitted to draw the veil of private life, I would briefly give you the singular and to me interesting story of two maiden ladies who dwell in this valley. I would tell you how in their youthful days they took each other as companions for life, and how this union, no less sacred to them than the tie of marriage, has subsisted in uninterrupted harmony for more than 40 years. In 1851, Charity's ill health finally caught up to her, and she died of a heart attack. setting their unofficial marriage at one of 42 years and a total relationship of 44 years. However, Charity's death was at the age of 74, so by the standards of the time, that's a full life. Sylvia moved in with her brother Asaph and lived until 1868 when she died at the age of 83. Naturally, the two are buried on the same plot and given a shared headstone just like any other couple. By learning about their lives, not only does it add to the undeniable proof of the historicity of LGBT+ relationships, it also similarly shows how people and cultures are complicated and never a monolith. But it is always heartwarming to know that back then, for some people, it was perfectly possible to be openly happy together as they were. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time.